I was working a civilian security job when a billionaire's son tried to fire me. He didn't know I was his father's former team leader. I took the security job at Victor Enterprises 3 months ago, hiding my military background from everyone except the CEO himself. The polyester uniform itched against my skin after 15 years of combat fatigues, but the job paid better than most security positions. I stood at my post by the exit doors, scanning the room full of wealthy donors attending the corporate fundraiser. Renee approached me with a clipboard in hand. She'd been my supervisor since day one and never suspected I had 3 combat tours under my belt. "Marcus, I need you on high alert tonight. The CEO's son is here, and he tends to get difficult when he drinks," she said. I nodded. Understood. Simone, the event coordinator, gathered our security team for a quick briefing before the guests arrived. She pointed out several VIPs we needed to monitor throughout the evening. "Blake Whitlock requires special attention," she explained. "He's the CEO's son and has a tendency to overindulge." The fundraiser began promptly at 7. I maintained my position, watching as the wealthy and influential filed in wearing outfits that cost more than I made in a month. 4 hours into my shift, I spotted him. Blake Whitlock entered wearing a designer suit that probably cost more than most people's cars. His girlfriend Talia clung to his arm, laughing at something he whispered in her ear. I recognized his type immediately. 30 years of never hearing the word no. Victor Whitlock arrived shortly after, commanding the room with his presence. Our eyes met briefly across the crowded space. He gave me a subtle nod of acknowledgement before continuing his conversations with donors. I watched Blake throughout the evening. He drank heavily, switching from champagne to bourbon within the first hour. His voice grew progressively louder as the night continued. "Another drink," he demanded of a passing server, snapping his fingers impatiently. Talia placed her hand on his arm. "Maybe slow down a bit, babe." He shrugged her off. "It's my father's party. I'll drink as much as I want." I maintained my professional demeanor despite recognizing several former clients in the crowd. Men I'd protected overseas now mingled with champagne flutes, unaware their former security detail now worked for $12 an hour. Blake cornered a young waitress near the bar. "This bourbon is watered down. Bring me something decent." The poor girl apologized profusely. "I'm sorry, sir. I'll get you another right away." Blake's executive assistant, Noelle, approached him cautiously. "Mr. Whitlock, your father would like a word when you have a moment." Blake turned abruptly, spilling expensive bourbon down his designer sleeve and onto Noelle's blouse. "Look what you made me do." Noelle froze, mortified as the liquid soaked through her white shirt. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Whitlock. Do you know how much this suit costs?" Blake's voice carried across the room. "More than you make in a year." I moved from my post, approaching the situation calmly. "Sir, let me help you with that." I handed Blake a napkin while discreetly passing several more to Noelle. Blake's eyes narrowed as he focused on me for the first time. "Who the hell are you?" he demanded. "Marcus, sir. Security." I kept my voice neutral and professional. Blake looked me up and down with obvious disdain. "Well, Marcus from security, shouldn't you be standing by a door somewhere instead of interrupting private conversations?" Noelle took the opportunity to slip away, mouthing a silent thank you in my direction. Blake noticed, and his expression darkened further. "I don't recall asking for your assistance," he said, his words slightly slurred. "Get back to your post before I have you removed." I nodded politely. "Yes, sir." As I turned to walk away, Blake grabbed my arm. "Wait, I know you from somewhere." I maintained my neutral expression. "I don't believe we've met before, sir." Blake stared at me for several uncomfortable seconds before releasing his grip. "Whatever, just stay out of my way for the rest of the night." I returned to my post, feeling Blake's eyes following me across the room. Talia appeared at his side, whispering something in his ear while glancing nervously in my direction. Blake drained his glass and headed toward the bar for another drink. I could tell from his unsteady gait that he'd already had too much. The night was far from over, and I had a feeling Blake Whitlock wasn't finished with me yet. Blake stormed across the room toward Renee, his face flushed with alcohol and anger. I watched from my post as he jabbed his finger into her clipboard, demanding information about me. "I want that security guard's employee file, now." His words slurred slightly as he swayed on his feet. Renee maintained her professional composure. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitlock, but personnel records are confidential." Blake's laugh was cold and dismissive. "Do you know who signs your paychecks? My father owns this entire company." I kept my eyes forward, pretending not to notice the confrontation. Blake wasn't finished with me yet. I could feel it. He pulled out his phone, stabbing at the screen with unsteady fingers. "Roman, get down to the fundraiser immediately. I need you to handle a situation." 10 minutes later, Roman appeared at Blake's side. Victor's head of security was a former police officer who took his position very seriously. He approached me with an apologetic expression. "Marcus, I need a word." Roman gestured toward a quiet corner of the room. I followed him, maintaining my professional demeanor. Blake trailed behind us, a smug smile spreading across his face. "There's been a complaint about your behavior tonight," Roman said quietly. "Mr. Whitlock has requested your removal from the event." I nodded calmly. "I understand, but I'd like to clarify what happened." Blake interrupted. "There's nothing to clarify. You're done here." Roman shot Blake an uncomfortable glance. "Sir, we still need to follow protocol." Blake's face darkened. "Protocol? I don't care about your security protocols. I want him gone." I reached for my phone. "Should I call Victor directly about this?" Roman's eyes widened. "You have Mr. Whitlock's direct number?" "He gave it to me when he hired me." I kept my voice neutral, revealing nothing about my history with Victor. Blake's confidence faltered momentarily. "You're bluffing." I said nothing, simply holding his gaze. Blake turned away first, heading back toward the bar. Roman leaned closer. Look, just try to keep a low profile for the rest of the night. Blake has pull with the company, but he's not in charge of security. My phone buzzed with an incoming text. It was from Malik, my former teammate from our military days. Heads up, Blake Whitlock is bad news. Reputation for getting staff fired when they cross him. Be careful. I slipped the phone back into my pocket. Blake was at the bar now, downing another bourbon while glaring in my direction. He whispered something to Talia, who glanced nervously toward me. The memory surfaced without warning. Victor's convoy, the ambush outside Kandahar, the explosion that flipped the lead vehicle, my team moving in through heavy fire to extract the civilians. Victor had been pinned down, bleeding from shrapnel wounds. I'd carried him through a hail of gunfire to the extraction point. His words as we lifted off in the helicopter still echoed in my mind. I'll never forget this. Never. Wesley, Victor's personal assistant, approached me with a concerned expression. He spoke quietly, keeping his back to the room. Marcus, it might be best if you took a break. Blake is making calls, trying to have you removed permanently. I nodded. Thank you for the heads up. Victor wouldn't approve of this, but he's tied up with donors right now. Wesley glanced nervously toward the VIP section. I had just decided to step outside when Blake appeared directly in front of me. His expensive cologne couldn't mask the smell of bourbon on his breath. You think you're untouchable because you have my father's number? His words were more slurred than before. I remained silent, maintaining my professional stance. Blake reached for my security badge, trying to yank it from my shirt. This is coming off. You're done working here. His fingers fumbled with the plastic ID card. I stepped back smoothly, avoiding his grasp without touching him. The movement was instinctive, born from years of combat training. Blake's face contorted with rage. Don't you dare move away from me! Do you know who I am? Several guests turned to watch the commotion. Talia hurried over, trying to pull Blake away. Babe, please. Not here. She tugged at his arm ineffectively. Blake shook her off. Everyone needs to see this. This rent-a-cop thinks he can disrespect me in my father's company. He reached for my badge again. Give me that ID right now, or I swear I'll have security throw you out on your ass. I remained perfectly still. Sir, I don't report to you. The simple statement enraged him further. Blake's face turned a deeper shade of red. Everyone in this building reports to me. My father owns everything you see. He gestured wildly around the room. Renee appeared at my side. Mr. Whitlock, please. We can discuss this privately. Blake ignored her, jabbing his finger into my chest. You think you're special because you have my dad's number? Call him. I dare you. I reached for my phone, scrolling to Victor's contact. Blake lunged for it, trying to knock it from my hand. I moved it away effortlessly, my combat reflexes taking over. The movement was subtle but precise. Several staff members nearby noticed, their expressions shifting as they recognized the trained response. Blake stumbled, thrown off balance by his failed grab. You just assaulted me! I hadn't touched him. We both knew it. The room had grown quieter, more eyes turning toward our confrontation. Blake straightened his designer jacket, his voice rising. Everyone saw that! This man just assaulted me! Talia pulled at his arm again. Blake, stop! He didn't touch you! Whose side are you on? Blake snapped at her. I continued scrolling to Victor's number, my thumb hovering over the call button. Blake saw this and made another grab for my phone. Don't you dare call my father! His voice had risen to a near shout. I stepped back again, maintaining distance without aggression. The movement was fluid, economical. More heads turned our way. Blake pointed at me, his hand shaking with anger. You're fired! Do you understand me? Fired! The room fell silent. In the sudden quiet, I heard the sound of footsteps approaching from behind Blake. Victor Whitlock stood in the doorway, his expression unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. Blake stood in the middle of the crowded fundraiser, his face flushed with rage as he pointed at me. Everyone listen up. This security guard is fired as of right now. The room fell silent. Conversations stopped mid-sentence as donors and executives turned to stare at the unfolding scene. I remained perfectly still, my expression neutral despite the public spectacle. Sir, you don't have the authority to terminate my employment, I said quietly. Blake's eyes widened with disbelief. What did you just say to me? I said you don't have the authority to fire me. I kept my voice calm and professional. Blake laughed, a harsh sound that echoed through the now silent room. I'm Blake Whitlock. My father owns this entire company. I can fire anyone I want. Talia tugged at his sleeve. Blake, please, let's just go get some air. He shook her off roughly. Don't touch me right now. Guests began to edge away from the confrontation, creating a small clearing around us. I could feel dozens of eyes watching, waiting to see what would happen next. I'm going to count to 3, Blake slurred, swaying slightly on his feet. If you're not gone by then, I'm calling the police. I met his gaze steadily. Perhaps we should call your father instead. His face darkened to a dangerous shade of red. You think my father gives a damn about some rent-a-cop? He signs your pathetic $12 an hour paychecks. Blake lunged forward suddenly, his hand reaching for my shoulder. I shifted my weight slightly, a subtle movement that allowed his hand to pass through empty air without making contact. He stumbled, thrown off balance by his failed attempt and the alcohol in his system. Several guests gasped. The movement had been smooth, efficient, unmistakably military in its precision. Did you see that? Blake shouted, pointing at me. He just assaulted me! Renee stepped forward. Mr. Whitlock, he didn't touch you. Shut up, Blake snapped at her. You're fired too. Talia made another attempt to defuse the situation. Blake, baby, please. Everyone's watching. Good. They should see this. Blake's voice had risen to a near shout. They should all see what happens when someone disrespects me in my father's company. I remained motionless, my posture straight but relaxed. Years of combat training had taught me to conserve energy during confrontations. Blake recognized the stillness, and it seemed to infuriate him further. "You think you're tough?" he demanded. "Some kind of badass security guard?" I said nothing. My silence only escalated his anger. "Everyone who works here belongs to my father," Blake announced to the room. "That includes you. You're nothing but property with a pulse." I reached for my phone. "I think it's time I called Victor directly." Blake's eyes widened. "Don't you dare say my father's name like you know him." I began scrolling through my contacts, finding Victor's number with practiced ease. Blake watched in disbelief as I prepared to make the call. "You're bluffing," he said, but uncertainty had crept into his voice. I held up the phone, showing Victor's name and number on the screen. Blake's face contorted with rage. He lunged forward again, this time grabbing for my phone. I pivoted smoothly, tucking the phone away while maintaining perfect balance. Blake stumbled forward, nearly falling before catching himself on a nearby table. "That's assault," he shouted, though everyone had seen he was the aggressor. Several staff members were watching with new interest. I could see recognition dawning in their eyes. The way I moved wasn't typical security guard training. My movements were too efficient, too precise. Roman had appeared at the edge of the crowd, watching the scene with growing concern. He took a step forward, but stopped when Blake raised his hand. "Don't interfere," Blake shouted at him. "This is between me and this nobody who thinks he can disrespect a Whitlock." Blake straightened his designer jacket, his breathing heavy with anger. "You're done. Finished. I'll make sure you never work security in this city again." I remained calm. "That's your prerogative, sir." "My what?" Blake's face twisted with confusion and rage. "Your prerogative. You're right." I kept my voice level. "But I still report to your father, not to you." Blake's face flushed an even deeper shade of red. "My father will back me 100% when I tell him what happened here." "Then let's call him now." I reached for my phone again. "Stop!" Blake lunged for the third time, his movements clumsy and telegraphed. I sidestepped him effortlessly. Blake's momentum carried him forward, and he would have crashed into a waiter carrying a tray of champagne if I hadn't caught his arm at the last second. The intervention was automatic. Years of protecting civilians had made it instinct. The room went completely silent. My hand on Blake's arm was the first contact I'd initiated, and it had been to prevent him from falling. Blake stared at my hand on his arm with shock. "Get your hands off me." I released him immediately, stepping back to a respectful distance. Blake straightened his jacket again, his embarrassment fueling his anger. "You put your hands on me," he shouted, trying to reframe what everyone had witnessed. Everyone saw that. The crowd had grown larger. Guests were no longer pretending not to watch. They were openly staring at the confrontation. "I was preventing you from falling, sir." My voice remained calm. Blake jabbed his finger toward my face. "You're done! Fired! Get out of this building right now!" I stood my ground. "I'm afraid I can't do that. I'm on duty until midnight." Blake's face contorted with impotent rage. He wasn't used to being denied anything, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. "Do you know who I am?" he demanded, his voice cracking with anger. "Yes, sir. You're Blake Whitlock, son of Victor Whitlock." "That's right. And when my father hears about this..." "When I hear about what, Blake?" The voice came from behind Blake. The crowd parted silently, revealing Victor Whitlock standing in the doorway. His expression was unreadable as he surveyed the scene before him. Blake turned, momentarily stunned by his father's sudden appearance. "Dad! This security guard assaulted me. I want him fired immediately." Victor's eyes moved from his son to me, then back again. "Is that so?" The room held its collective breath, waiting for Victor's response. Blake stood swaying slightly, his confidence returning now that his father had arrived. "He grabbed me," Blake insisted. "Everyone saw it." Victor stepped forward, his gaze fixed on me. "Marcus, is that true?" "I prevented him from falling into a waiter, sir." I kept my response simple and factual. Victor nodded slowly, his expression giving nothing away. Blake watched this exchange with growing confusion. "Wait," Blake said, looking between us. "You know him?" Victor's face remained impassive as he turned to address the room. "Ladies and gentlemen, please continue enjoying your evening. The situation is under control." The crowd hesitated, reluctant to miss whatever was coming next. Victor's expression hardened slightly. "Please." The magic word worked. Guests began to drift away, returning to their conversations, though many still watched from a distance. Blake stood frozen, suddenly uncertain of his position. Victor turned back to face me and his son. The room fell silent once more, as everyone waited to see what would happen next. Victor's voice cut through the tension like a knife. "Blake, that's enough." Blake turned to face his father, relief washing over his features. "Dad, this security guard assaulted me. I want him fired immediately." Victor ignored his son's demands, walking past him to stand directly in front of me. "Captain Marcus Reeves, it's been a long time." Blake's mouth fell open. "Captain? What are you talking about?" Victor placed a hand on my shoulder. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce you to the man who saved my life in Afghanistan 7 years ago." The room fell completely silent. Blake stared at his father in disbelief. "This man was my Special Forces team leader during the convoy attack outside Kandahar," Victor continued. "When our vehicles were hit, Captain Reeves carried me through enemy fire to safety." Blake's face drained of color. "What? That's not possible." Victor turned to face his son. "Everything we have, this company, our lives, we owe to Marcus and his team." Blake looked between us, struggling to process this revelation. "Why didn't you tell me? Why is he working security?" "Because that's what he wanted," Victor said simply. "And after what he did for me, I wasn't about to deny him anything." The guests began to whisper among themselves. I maintained my professional stance despite suddenly becoming the center of attention. Victor addressed the crowd. Please, continue enjoying your evening. The situation is resolved. The guests reluctantly dispersed, though many continued watching from a distance. Blake stood frozen, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. Marcus, may I have a word in private? Victor gestured toward a nearby office. I nodded. Of course, sir. Blake stepped forward. Dad, I didn't know. Victor cut him off. We'll discuss this later, Blake. I followed Victor into his private office adjacent to the main event space. He closed the door behind us and sighed deeply. I apologize for my son's behavior, he said. There's no excuse for it. I shook my head. No apology necessary, sir. Victor walked to his desk and leaned against it. I've been meaning to talk to you about your position here. 3 months of basic security work is beneath your abilities. I remained standing at parade rest, an old military habit. I appreciate the job, sir. It's been a good transition to civilian life. I want to offer you a position as executive security director, Victor said. Full benefits, company car, and a salary commensurate with your experience and skills. The offer caught me off guard. That's very generous, sir. Victor waved away my hesitation. It's the least I can do. You carried me through gunfire with a bullet in your shoulder. I wouldn't be here without you. I considered his offer. May I have some time to think about it? Of course. Victor handed me his business card. Call me directly when you've decided. We returned to the fundraiser. Blake was waiting outside the office, his expression uncharacteristically subdued. Captain Reeves, I want to apologize for my behavior, he said stiffly. I could tell the words were difficult for him. Apology accepted, Mr. Whitlock. Blake nodded awkwardly and walked away. Talia followed him, shooting me a grateful look over her shoulder. The next morning, I met Malik at a coffee shop downtown. He listened intently as I explained Victor's offer. Executive Security Director? That's a serious step up from standing by exit doors, Malik said. I sipped my coffee. It's more responsibility than I was looking for. Malik leaned forward. Look, you've been hiding behind that security uniform for 3 months. Maybe it's time to stop running from who you really are. His words hit home. I've been avoiding my past, pretending to be just another security guard. You've got skills most security firms would kill for, Malik continued. Why waste them? I nodded slowly. You make a good point. 3 days later, I accepted Victor's offer. My first act as executive security director was implementing a complete overhaul of the company's security protocols. Roman was initially skeptical, but quickly came around when he saw my plans. This is impressive, Captain. Military-grade security for a civilian corporation. I corrected him gently. Just Marcus now. The captain stayed in Afghanistan. A week into my new position, Blake approached my office. He knocked tentatively on the doorframe. Got a minute? He asked, his usual arrogance nowhere to be seen. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Of course. Blake sat down awkwardly. My father told me everything. About the ambush, how you carried him to safety despite being wounded yourself. I said nothing, waiting for him to continue. I've been a real asshole, Blake admitted. Not just to you, but to everyone. I never understood what my father went through over there. His humility seemed genuine. War changes your perspective on things, I said simply. Blake nodded. I want to learn about security, about what you do. Maybe I could shadow you sometime? The request surprised me. I think that could be arranged. 2 months later, Victor hosted a private dinner at his home. He invited my entire former team, including Malik. During dessert, he stood and raised his glass. To Captain Marcus Reeves and his team, Victor said, the men who gave us all a second chance at life. I looked around at my former teammates, now spread across various security firms and private military companies. We shared a bond that civilians could never fully understand. Later that evening, Victor showed me a framed photo in his study. It showed the two of us in Afghanistan, covered in dust and blood, but alive. I keep this to remind myself of what matters, Victor said quietly. Not the money or the company, but the people who sacrifice everything so others can live. I nodded, finally accepting that my past wasn't something to hide. It was part of who I was, who I would always be. The security guard uniform had been comfortable in its anonymity, but standing in Victor's study as his executive security director, I finally felt like I was exactly where I belonged.